I just woke up. It's Romania Black. Woke up this morning and I thought, well, how do I want to start my day? Obviously, it's going to be Revolutionary Girl Utena. We're on episode 29. We're on episode 29. You tell me. I have no clue. I have no clue what we're doing. I have no clue where this is going. I have no clue what we're doing next. Last week we had a whole new character introduced. Now of all times, and he's terrifying because he's got the slightly misogynistic and smoothness of Toga, but he's less aggressive, and that makes it worse. He's like if Toga and Akio got together in a way. I don't think he's as dangerous as Akio, by far, but there is something about him, like Toga seems to have an MO, right? Toga's like, for whatever reason, he wants power. For whatever reason, he wants to be in control. For whatever reason, he wants to be the one that's like, not necessarily pulling the strings, but he wants to be the one that's right beside the person pulling the strings. That seems to be Toga's whole thing. And so he has stakes and he has care that for whatever he's doing. Ruka doesn't look like he gives a shit. He's just here to cause chaos. And I'm like, nope. I'm terrified of him, honestly. Ruka terrifies me to a great extent. And last week, he almost won, but it just seemed like he was just testing the waters and seeing why things were working for Utena. Why Akio and Toga couldn't figure it out for themselves and they had to go find this guy, I don't know. But apparently they couldn't figure it out. How many duelists does it take to figure out that Utena loves Anthe? Clearly 3. Or maybe more. Or we'll do cat everybody. I don't know where this is going. As you can see, I have a lot of feral energy this morning, so I thought, no, Utena it is. If I'm going to channel all this feral energy, this is the show to do it. So here we are. I do have a lot of comments, so we're gonna get through those. So theories going into this episode, because like I said, I did not watch the preview. I have no clue where it's going from here. We were introduced to Ruka. It was really tempting to watch the preview. I almost did it, but I was like, nope, don't do it. Don't do it. Be surprised. So theories going in. I did think about this after recording. Is the prince's spirit, is it just a spirit and him being on the egg is tied to Anthe and this whole thing with like the Nanami egg episode and Anthe's like her femininity and tied to like is the prince's spirit just a spirit? Is it a spirit inside of anyone that's androgynous? Is it synonymous with just power? Or is the prince an actual person? That to me is the big question at this point. Because we know Akio is an actual person, we think. He could be a ghost too. They all could be ghosts, right? This could be Casper's Friendly Ghost Land for all we know. But is the prince an actual person who's like a brother or relative to Anthe and Akio? Or is the prince like a spiritual side of Anthe that is trapped that Akio is trying to access? I don't know at this point. I'm assuming by the end of the movie, if not the end of the series, we'll find out. But that's kind of where I'm at. Is Akio trying to access the prince's power? And is the prince just another version of Anthe? Because Anthe so far has been the only one we've seen with the ability to shapeshift. But we don't know if Akio can do that too. What about Choo-Choo? We still don't know about Choo-Choo. So there's lots of questions. This series does a thing where it makes you ask a question to yourself and then it decides we're going to throw in an anonymity episode to completely throw you off. And it's like, ugh. And now we're back. And then it's thrown in Ruka. So it's like, oh yeah, don't worry about those questions we brought up. We'll figure them out later. And I'm like, I cannot stand you. Bet on losing dogs. 5344 says the episode 24 recap is bare bones in such a creepy way. Yes, I loved this comment. They were like, none of the characters remember the duels or their own character developments or journeys. Their lives and memories have been reset to the point that all we can recap is the empty feeling arc 1 style of Nanami shenanigans. Yeah, they kind of brought that to light, and I hadn't thought about it that way until they phrased it as such. But yeah, we've reset after the Mikage arc. So all that character development, what character development? That's why when we had Mickey and Kozu duel back in episode 26, I was like, Mickey, haven't you learned your lesson? Well, no, he's forgotten. And I don't like that. I don't like playing on memory. I don't like that at all. I'm like, stop it. Akio, stop it. And it seems from episode 26 that Utena is the only one who really is kind of like, but wait a minute, haven't we already done this? And it's like, and maybe jury, but I don't know. But yeah, that's so creepy. The idea of Akio affecting everybody's memory is creepy. I don't like it. I don't like this time loop. I'm ready to get out of it. I don't think we're going to get out of it before the end of the series, but it's so frustrating. And then Shimayama's comment floored me. So we've talked a little bit with other series like Neon Genesis Evangelion and seeing like when does this show fit in the time slot? Because, you know, here in the US, when I was growing up, you would have during the day shows like Sailor Moon, which honestly Sailor Moon was heavily censored when I watched it, but there were still like moments of like the transformation and some nudity that as a kid, but they put it like a rainbow glow, so I guess it was okay. But I was still like, okay, this is kind of risque for a kid's show. But they showed that, and then you had like Pokemon and Digimon during the day and stuff like that. And then at night, Toonami or Adult Swim, it was Toonami at the time, would have like your shows like Yu Yu Hakusho. It would have shows like Dragon Ball Z. It would have Cowboy Bebop. It would have some more mature shows that would start from later afternoon into the evening so that, you know, little kids probably weren't watching and saying that. I always remember watching Tenchi Muyo as a kid. I really need to go back and rewatch that series. But as Tenchi Muyo as a kid, I was like, what is this? And so, but anyway, we've talked about how Neon Genesis Evangelion, we're like, when did that air? Was that on like a kid slot or adult slot? Shimayama says again, and they're from Japan. They say, again, I'm telling you, and they put in all caps, this was aired in the evening at 6 p.m., not midnight. It was supposed to be watched by children. When I first watched the episode 25, I was in middle school. I could unlock some of the symbolisms, and I was repeatedly screaming, what the hell? Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I imagine up until episode 25, you're like, okay, well, it's all very subtle, and it's all very, you know, the symbolism's there if you want to extrapolate it, but you know, you can get around it, and you can go, oh, okay, well, a kid probably wouldn't pick that up. I don't know how you go around Akio with his pants unbuttoned and unzipped and just lying on a bed next to Toga. I don't know how you don't get symbolism out of that. If it's even symbolism at that point, and it's not just context. Mind blown. Mind blown. What in the world? So Shimayama, that comment blows my mind. Elfreya, I liked their comment a lot. They said Utena didn't seem to feel any pain from Anthy drawing the sword. In contrast to when, and this is back like in episode 25, 26, in contrast to when all the Black Ring duelists forcibly removed from unwilling love interests. I wonder if it's being consensual or not in result of how painful it is. I hadn't thought about that, and how is them drawing the swords consensual dependent upon how much pain that person is in. Interesting. Which would kind of go back to maybe Toga not really caring when the sword was drawn out of him and just being dramatic. Anthy never really shows any pain either, I think. Perhaps as the Rose Bride, she consents to the act as her duty, or perhaps she is sadly accustomed to the pain of it, and either way, it's pretty terrible. Yeah, that point there, I was like, ooh, I think that Utena was fine having the sword drawn from her because it was consensual, and she didn't feel any pain because it was Anthy, and she wanted that and was fine with it. And Anthy, though, that does raise a lot of questions of, is she okay with the sword being drawn because it's her duty, or is she sadly accustomed to abuse and letting it just happen? That's also, I think it's interesting to note that we've kind of transitioned, and it's like a turning point in Utena and Anthy's relationship, where now instead of Utena drawing the sword from Anthy and thus doing an act that Anthy kind of is obligated to agree to, now the tables are turned and Utena's having the sword drawn from her by Anthy, even though Utena's the one using it, showing that Utena doesn't want Anthy to suffer. Love that. Also, Elfreya's comment said, despite the show keeping Despite the show keeps telling us the end of the world is a person, I'm not sure I believe that. Perhaps it's more of a state of being. Is the end of the world perhaps the meaning of the end of one's childlike innocence? I'm not sure. Perhaps desiring eternity is actually ironic because the one thing that's eternal is death. Yeah. Yep. Those are little nuggets of food for thought. Yeah, I wonder too. I mean, the end of the world, the way the car ride has portrayed the last few episodes, the end of the world seems to be a destination, and that destination does not seem to be literal, but rather I've kind of interpreted it as the end of the world is the end of childhood, and once you become an adult, then it's like the end of the world. Right? So Akio is kind of tapping into that little twilight era before you become an adult, but you're not a child anymore. And that little twilight area is the sweet spot where you can soak up all the energy for the Negaverse. That's my interpretation of it at this point, but I could be proven woefully wrong later on. Or it might be left ambiguous and we're just like, what is it? Who knows? Maybe that's it. But I really like that. But yes, the idea that only one thing is eternal and that is death kind of goes in line with the whole kind of, the idea that all of these characters, these duelists, have this part of eternity they want to hold on to. But the reality is, like we've seen with Mikage, you can't do that. It's not possible. The only thing that's guaranteed is that you're going to die. Everything else is just fleeting. So anyway, we're not gonna think about existential things like that. Don't you worry. So then, Meredith Flugelhorn 7352 in episode 20 talks about how I never quite thought about like this before, but Utena feels that she can't talk to Wakaba about any of the stuff going on in her life right now. She has no outside confidant who will listen to her and ground her and ask questions and point things out because she doesn't want Wakaba involved and Wakaba doesn't know about the duelists and all that as of episode 20. Instead, she's been going to Akio, who is such a good listener and has such wise-sounding observations. Bleh! No, right. Yeah, that's kind of it. Utena has nobody else to go to as a confidant that's not a duelist, and she doesn't really interact with the student council at all because they're actively dueling her all the time. So Akio's been the only person other than Anthe she can go to, and Akio's the bad guy. So you're just walking into the lion's den and being like, oh, hey, here's what I'm thinking about doing to you. And he's like, oh, really? Well, here's my recommendations. And it's like, ah. So then Oliver Jajado says Ikuhara's commentary for episode 25 is probably the longest of the whole series, but the metaphor he's utilizing is actually pretty straightforward. So episode 25, their eternal apocalypse. Out of nowhere, Saionji comes back all powered up. Why did he power up? Because he rode in the acting chairman's car, of course. So why does riding in his car let someone power up? The staff had this conversation during work about the episode. A was a salaryman at a certain small to mid-sized company, which we'll say is Saionji. He was clever at his job, so the company considered him an asset, but he was unable to stay motivated about his work. This isn't the work that he wants to do. So it's kind of like Saionji not wanting to participate in the duels anymore, and I feel like because Saionji kind of relates to Anthe a little bit, he no longer sees the point in it, and he's not seeing any results from it, so he's like, I'm gonna leave, bye. Stealing his resolve, he goes to the CEO and spoke his mind saying, I'd like to quit. And the CEO says, now, slow down there. Why don't you have dinner with me tonight? And so A was taken to a certain sushi restaurant. The restaurant had no sign in front and was set back slightly from the road. It was a type of restaurant that didn't serve to patrons without an introduction. This was the first time A had been to a sushi restaurant that wasn't the conveyor belt type. He'd always thought of a sushi restaurant as a place with menus or where the ingredients were listed on boards behind the chefs, but in this restaurant, the choices weren't written down anywhere. Despite this, A's chef placed one piece of sushi after another in front of him, without him having to place any orders like chutoro or kampachi, always just at the right time. And that wasn't all. Each piece melted into his mouth like no conveyor belt sushi had ever tasted. This is what an exclusive restaurant is like. So it's like he's buttered up and talked about how great things are, just like the car ride. And at this point, the CEO, who had been sitting silently behind him having a drink with his supper, began to speak. The CEO wasn't eating any sushi. He was drinking and grazing on some sashimi. Isn't this place good? Oh, A says, huh? Oh, yes, sir. With me at your side, You can come to places like this every week. And what's more, every week, shall we move on to the next place? The two of them vanished into the busy streets glittering with neon. So it's the idea of like the deal with the devil, like, oh, but you can have all these wonderful things. Isn't this what you want? Isn't this the great life that you want and the power you seek? If you stay with me, you can have everything. The next day, A appears at work with a bright and shining face of a whole new man. And he says, I'm not the same man I was yesterday. And the coworkers are like, oh. He says, I've seen everything. I know how this world is set up now, and that's why I'm here. And from that day forward, A's motivation skyrocketed, and he completely forgot about quitting the company. Apparently something like that happened. Oh, why does he ride on the hood of the car, you ask? Well, if you want to know that, you better come along. So yeah, it's just basically that idea of the deal with the devil and Akio being like, but I can give you all these amazing things. And then it just snapping him back into place. Oh, that's so terrifying. Also, finally, before we start this episode, Althusi said in the Discord this morning, as I'm about to record this, they were like any good theme, there are many good ways of interpreting Mickey's obsession with the stopwatch. But I like to think my favorite one that often gets overlooked is that Miki's the secretary of the student council. He's in charge of the minutes. I did not put enough coffee in this morning. I'm going to have to refill that before the discussion. I know it. But oh my God, that's freaking hilarious. That's freaking funny. Just he's in charge of the minutes. If that's really the answer, I'm down for it. Sure. Yep, you do you show. I've talked for over 15 minutes, but y'all, I am stalling because there's so much to think about. I am not ready. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Yep. Anyway, we're not going to waste any more time. I keep covering up the wrong angle. All right. I'm just going to have to rip off the Band-Aid and we're going to have to accept things and see where the cards go. So thank you all for watching with me. I hope you all enjoy this reaction and discussion, but we are going to start episode 29 of Revolutionary Girl Utena, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and I'll see you all on the other side. If there's something strange in your neighborhood, who you gonna call? Lesbians! So Ruka's gone. That was just our 2-episode. That's all you get out of Ruka. That's all you get out of him. Man, I had to go refill my coffee and get some strong coffee for this one. Oh my God. So I was really convinced the Shadow Girls were going to show up. And I was like, wow, this is the first episode we've not had the Shadow Girls. That feels so weird, but maybe they're just taking a break from the episode. I think this is the first episode we haven't had them. And then they come in at the 12th hour and they're like, oh, by the way, bitch, he's a ghost and he's gone now because he didn't get his wish and it was unfulfilled. Take that! It's like, there are parts of this episode that are very straightforward. The symbolism is very straightforward. And you're like, oh, okay. And there are parts I was starting to get a little bit worried, but then the episode kind of rectified that. And I was like, okay, cool. I really thought that Ruka was going to be this very sinister, very dark presence. But the reality is, as Toga kind of alludes to, no, Ruka's pretty straightforward actually in what he wanted. It was very Mikage, and the foreshadowing was there. The moment that Ruka started slowly tilting his head back to Juri, I was like, you're a ghost too, aren't you? You're a ghost as well, because all these ghosts are slowly turning their head. Now, does that mean that Anthony's a ghost too, as she slowly looked back at the camera? Hell, yeah, she could be, for all we know. Is that gonna break my freaking heart if she ends up being a ghost and Utena and her can't be together in the end? Who knows? Who knows? But we're not nearly to that point yet. So we need to just back off and we're not gonna think about that. We're not going to think about that right now. We're going to take anything with Anthony and we're going to put it off here to the side. We're not going to worry about that now because Romania's heart doesn't need to worry about that right now. Instead, we're going to focus on Ruka. So yeah, Ruka was a ghost. Just like Mikage. Just a different kind of ghost. Oh my God. I'm just waiting for, here's the thing. I was thinking about this over the episode and I was thinking about it. I'm like, what if we find out that Toga's a ghost as well? What if we find out Toga's a ghost? They're all ghosts. Nobody's alive. They're all ghosts in this ghost school, just living out their days until their purposes are fulfilled. And Akio sucked all their energy out. And then he's like, okay, you've graduated. Bye. And they can finally have their souls rest in peace. That's literally probably what this is. But you know what? We're not going to focus on that. We're going to just be in the here and now, in the present for this current episode. But I will say before we start, I did have the thought of Nanami, because Nanami's always been tied to her brother. And at this point, we've had Mickey and Kozu 2.0 again. We've had Saionji 2.0, or like 4.0 at this point again. We've had Juri now 2.0 again. And I feel like Juri's episodes, we'll talk about it this week, but I feel like her episodes get almost the most angst. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. And then so really, all we have left are if we do a Wakaba 2.0, which at this point, I don't know if we would do a Wakaba 2.0 because she's kind of like had her whole thing with Saionji. So I don't know if we'll have a Wakaba 2.0. I don't know what more you could do with that. Her and Saionji are pretty much done, and that was tied to Mikage even. So I don't know if we would get a Wakaba 2.0. I feel like maybe she might help Utena in a later episode or be a confidant for Utena. Possibly, we don't know. But I don't know about that. That's kind of like over here in the wishy-washy area. But your other options are to have Nanami 2.0, which I was thinking of that. I was like, okay, Nanami's whole thing was for her brother's sake, and that's why she dueled. And so that you could tie Nanami 2.0 and Toga 2.0 together. What if we find out that Toga is a ghost? And what if he like disappears in front of Nanami's eyes? Or what if she forgets about him? What if something happens with Toga? I've been wondering this entire time because Toga goes along with Akio like it's nothing. Toga goes along with Akio like that's what he wants, that it's all tied to whatever his motivations are. But here's the thing. Toga's going to be like I feel like Toga's like a linchpin in all of this because the moment that Toga starts to question and the moment that Toga kind of realizes that Akio's using all of them for his nefarious means, I feel like that's when everything's going to fall apart. Because right now, Toga is the one that's initiating all this. Like Ruka even said themselves. He's like, Toga, say the catchphrase. And he's like, your world of desires. I was like, Ruka's in on the joke. Ruka's like breaking the fourth wall with that. And so I feel like Toga is essential for all this going down. Because Toga, Ruka introduced the car in this episode. But Toga's always there when the car appears, right? And so Toga is expecting something out of this. Whatever that is, we don't know. Toga has been, of all the duelists, Toga is the most mysterious because we don't directly have confirmation of his purposes and goals. We can speculate, and they seem pretty obvious. He wants power, but that's all we know. We don't know anything else about Toga. So I feel like Toga's going to be the last person we really find out the truths about, and that's going to be like the catalyst for the final act. I feel like everything's going to fall apart if Toga suddenly realizes that he's not going to get what he wants and that Akio's just using them, and or he already knows Akio's using them and he's okay with it, but there's going to be something happen where Toga questions it and is like, actually, I do care. So my theory, before we dive into this episode and forget about Toga until a brief moment, my theory is that I think a couple things might happen, but I think that Toga might start to question what his purpose is and whether this is all actually what he wants for whatever reason. We don't know how that's going to happen, but I feel like, because all we have left as far as duelists go are Nanami and Toga to revisit. And we're going to be on episode 30 next week, meaning we have like 9 episodes to go. And you could do a lot in 9 episodes. God knows we have. You could do a lot in 9 episodes, but I wonder if we'll have a Nanami episode where Nanami will question things. What would be the most heartbreaking thing to happen to Nanami? Well, the most heartbreaking thing would be for her to forget about her brother, because her brother's everything to her. So for her to forget about him would be the most heartbreaking thing. But I feel like forgetting about Toga would cataclysmically affect everything, because everything's kind of tied to him. The student council, Mitsuru, all of that is tied to him. So if he's forgotten as a ghost, then then it would just throw everything away, and Utena would be like, wait, what? So what would be the most heartbreaking thing we could do to Nanami? Well, it'd be have her forget her brother. And if her brother ends up being a ghost, like if they're all ghosts, but if he ends up getting revealed as a ghost first, then he disappears and graduates and whatever. That's what I think might happen, which would be heartbreaking. And I don't know how to feel about that. But again, I could be totally wrong, and that could be not what happens. So I don't know what else they can do with Nanami and Toga, pitting them against each other. I don't know, but this show surprises me every week, so I'm sure it might think of something. But literally, those are the only two left to do things with, other than Wakaba 2.0. But I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, so let's I've spent enough time. Let's dive into this episode. The chair metaphor was like the most obvious thing to me, so I guess we should start there. And so young Shiori, this part's interesting. Young Shiori is the one who says, if you believe in miracles, then believe in miracles, and they will know your true feelings. Shiori's whole thing has been tied to miracles throughout this. I think it's interesting that young Shiori says this from an early age, and Ruka seems to have known. So Ruka seems to have been like childhood friends. I'm going to put childhood friends with Shiori, because when else would you have heard this from her? But Shiori's whole thing with this is that her true feelings are that she loves Shiori. That is her unrequited crush. That's her love. She loves Shiori. My theory going into this is that Ruka, he loved Shiori. He loved Shiori, but realized that that was impossible. I think the whole thing is that Ruka loved Shiori. He fell in love with her as they were fencing and growing up together. And then as he got older and saw her reaction to Shiori, he suddenly realized, shit, she likes women, doesn't like men. It's never going to happen. And that kind of like shattered for him. That kind of shattered his whole world. And so her concept of is if you believe in miracles, they'll know your true feelings. That seems to have applied to him. He's like, well, my miracle would be that Shiori falls in love with me and realizes that I love her and returns that love. For him, that miracle is shattered because that's not going to happen. For Shiori, the sad part is it could happen for her and Shiori. And the end of this episode kind of alludes to the fact that it could. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit, or a while from now, depending on how long this discussion takes. But yeah, but I feel bad for Ruka now. I was really afraid of him and thinking he was going to be this big villain. But the reality is he was just Casper the Friendly Ghost wanting to get back with his crush and then realized that wasn't going to happen. Damn. So anyway, we'll get through all of this, y'all. This episode floored me. So we cut back to Shiori realizing that the sword she was cleaning was actually Juri's sword. And of course, we're going to put Shiori down here. Of course, Shiori's whole thing is that she seems like the textbook case of her. It's a textbook. She's not homophobic necessarily. She never gets on to Shiori for liking women, but she wants to stay closeted and does not want to admit she likes Shiori. Right? So it's interesting. She doesn't want to admit that she likes Shiori. She doesn't want to admit those feelings for whatever reason, whether she thinks it's wrong or she doesn't think that that should be how things are or whatever the case may be. We don't really get into that with Shiori, and we don't have to get in that with Shiori, but we can make all the assumptions we want, but she doesn't want to admit that she likes Shiori. Meanwhile, Yuri's whole deal is that she doesn't want rejection and wants to self-preserve herself. And I don't blame her. I don't blame her a bit. I've had that situation where I've experienced an unrequited crush. I had a crush on a guy and I liked him a lot. And it wasn't requited. He didn't care for me the same way. And there is a part of you that's like, you want the best for that person. You know, the phrase, if you love them, let them go. It's like, okay, well, Shiori's like, fine. If she doesn't love me, then I at least want her to be happy. And if I have to sacrifice my love for her being returned, for her being happy, I care about her enough that fine, then we'll do that. And at least I'll know that she's a happy person despite me not being able to be with her. I fully understand that. I've been through that like Shiori has. So I get that. And that part's so hard because, yeah, you basically just say, I'll sacrifice my own happiness for someone else's. We're going to go back to that. So the idea, we're going to talk about Shiori. Shiori was willing to sacrifice her happiness for Shiori's. And we'll touch base on it, but it seems, because Ruka makes the comment that miracles require sacrifice. And it seems that by the end of the episode, Shiori starts to talk to Shiori. She like comes out from behind the tree and goes and meets up with Shiori. Well, their memories of Ruka are fading because he's dead and he's not at the academy anymore. So Shiori doesn't have any love for him anymore. So this opened up a way for her to go talk to Shiori. So it's almost like Shiori, in sacrificing her own happiness for Shiori, was able to create the miracle. Or you could look at it a different way, and that Ruka in the end, maybe Ruka recognized her sacrifice. He recognized her sacrifice, and that was going to allow them to be together. So he was like, fine. And maybe Ruka thought, if I'm not here, then they can be together. And maybe Ruka thought the same thing. Ruka was like, I'll sacrifice my dream and happiness so that you can be happy, Shiori. And it creates, because we have these three chairs, right? Ruka is one chair. Shiori is another chair. And Shiori is the third chair. We have three chairs here. Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? The number three. The three is a very special spiritual number, right? And Ruka's saying, that wasn't my sword. He's like, you're playing, you're pretending, you have a talent for ad-libs, but if you believe in miracles, they will know your feelings. This love triangle is insane. And it's so crazy because what ends up happening is that Ruka loved Shiori. Shiori loves Shiori. Shiori thinks that she loves Ruka, but she actually loves Shiori. And then Ruka tries to get with Shiori to make Shiori angry because he's upset at the fact that she likes Shiori and that Shiori likes her. So it's just this big giant love triangle and it's insane. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. But the fact of the matter is that Shiori and Ruka both like Shiori and Shiori chose Shiori. And Ruka's like, the fudge is what it amounts to, is what it all comes down to. I love the over dramatized, like everybody in the whole damn school comes out and watches Ruka breaking up with her like it's a big spectacle, and she's like, believe me, and he's like, what do you want me to believe? I think it's interesting that Utena and Anthe are watching them, and she's like, more than anyone, and then he walks away. And Utena's kind of sad about this because Utena's probably like, damn, like that girl's in pain, that's really sad. And meanwhile, Anthe looks over and watches Shiori walk away. The episode's called Azure Paler Than the Sky. And the moment I saw that title, I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be a sad episode. Because I thought of a couple of things. One, when you think of something pale, you think of something sad. Azure is a shade of blue. So it's like the sky being, a color of blue paler than the sky itself. I also thought back to, there is an episode of Ace of the Diamond, which is a sports anime, but in the episode, it talks about how like the day such and such happened, the sky was remarkably clear and blue. And it's like, meaning something bad was going to happen, right? I've also seen that metaphor used in another episode of another series that I watched where they were like, oh, the sky was insanely blue that day. And it's like, oh, that a sign that bad things are going to happen despite it looking very peaceful and calm outside. Like calm before the storm. This episode definitely felt like calm before the storm in a sense too, which has me very worried, as you know, for episode 30. So yeah. So, of course, Shiori stops coming to school. Everybody's like, well, can you blame her? It was a public breakup. Everybody in the school knows about it. She probably feels embarrassed. And they're debating on whether or not Ruka was mean to her. And they're like, oh, and somebody are like, oh, well, Ruka was really mean. He shouldn't have done that. And then others say, oh, no, Shiori was really dramatic and overboard. And they're like, well, it doesn't matter either way. That's the crazy part. At the end of the episode, Ruka's gone. Nobody cares anymore. It doesn't matter. We're in a time loop. Things just reset. Like you do. And I agree with somebody that's like, what a mess. Ora, what a mess. So, Juri, though, I respect Juri so much. Juri is like, girl is dealing with so much. She's like, she likes Shiori. She knows Shiori doesn't like her back. She feels tortured by it, but she's like, I gotta just move on. I gotta keep doing me. I can't, I could sit here and worry about it, but you know what? No. I really like the way the duel and getting Juri set up to help was handled. I think out of all of them so far, it's been the most realistic and makes the most sense, which we'll talk about. I also love, on top of the banister, Anthe is not looking down at any of them. Anthe is not paying attention to any of them. Because I think Anthe knows a bit more of what Juri's going through, perhaps, than she lets on, which we'll talk about later. But Utena's mad. Utena's like, hey, this is your friend. Also, we immediately get 3 windows with a diamond pattern next to them, the number 3, of course. And Juri's like, are you butting in, Utena? And I like this just random room with cross-shaped diagonal crosses because, of course, crosses, of course, diamonds. Also, in a lot of BL series that I've watched and a lot of GL series now, when we see geometric shapes all frequently, it seems like it's very queer-coded, having a lot of geometric shapes be around it. I don't know the full story with it, but I have noticed it throughout a lot of media. I know that there's articles about it and what it represents. I know there's the triangle with the LGBTQA+ community, but I've always felt like geometric shapes are tied to queer identity. And here, there's a whole floor of crosses with geometric shapes in them. So you do with that what you will. But Juri says that Utena has a bad habit for butting into other people's businesses. And Utena's like, you are absolutely correct. But Utena always comes at it, again, Utena has this very dangerous innocence where she thinks that she's just randomly butting in to be helpful. But like Akio has said in previous episodes, it can be rather intuitive and interesting, right? So Utena just wants Juri to be there for her friend. What's interesting is that Utena keeps growing as the series goes, despite everybody else being reset. And Utena knows from Wakaba, she's like, well, be a friend. You should help her. Like, I should have helped Wakaba more, and I wasn't able to. And she's like, aren't you worried about her? Like, Shiori's taking this really hard. And Juri's like, it's not Utena's business to know that I love Shiori. It's not her business. So she's like, I'm not going to involve her. I'm not going to get her caught up in this. She's like, look, everything's between her and Ruka. It's none of my business. She's like, if I get involved, Shiori's just going to be pissed. And Utena's like, but she's like, it's not my problem. And since it isn't, I'm not getting involved. I have no right to. And Utena's like, well, but aren't you friends with both of them? A friend of yours is being treated like this and you do nothing. Which is funny because in a sense, Anthe's getting treated by a second party in a bad way, and Utena doesn't exactly know about it. I guess that's what would make it worse, is that the fact that because Utena doesn't know what's going on with Anthe, she doesn't know to help her, because if she did know what was going on with Anthe, she would help her. But here, the irony is she's sitting there telling Juri about what she should do as a friend, when, in all reality, Utena should be doing that for Anthe, but doesn't know any better. You could at least hear her side of things. She's like, I'm not going to repeat myself. But she does end up going to Shiori's. She does end up going to her, which is interesting. So one thing I was so happy about as we transition back to the Dick Tower is that Utena is not going to Akio for advice anymore. She's not. She's going to Anthe for advice and talking to Anthe, which is such a transition. Also, couple things. one, as I'm looking at this picture, the idea of the giant tree and dueling area that's shrouded in the tree-like thing. If we're talking about sexual references, and this is gonna, you all will be like, what? But do you not maybe think that there's a sexual innuendo or reference to the fact that it's like, and I'm gonna just talk about anatomy, but usually like where the genitals are for both men and women, there's typically hair there, like pubic hair, stuff like that. Do we think that that area kind of looks like the bush before the penis? Is it just me? I'm just grasping for phallic straws here at this point. Also, on the dick tower, there are two roses that are on top of one another. One rose is very big and one rose is very small. We've seen that kind of symbolism before. So I don't know if the overall rose is like Anthe and the prince together and the smaller one is Akio. Don't know. We'll find out. But Utena says she thinks that Juri is forcing herself to do this. I like that she calls her Miss Arisugawa, which is, for a second, I was like, oh, we all know her as Juri, but Utena's being respectful. She's like, I think she's forcing herself to do this. Shiori's really hurt, but Juri says it's not her problem, and I don't get it. So Utena's like, well, she can tell she's hurt. Why doesn't she help? Why is she not getting involved? Is that how she really feels? And Anthe says, well, perhaps it's one part of her true feelings. So Utena is like, why, if Juri cares, why doesn't she help? We as the audience know that Juri doesn't help because she doesn't want to face rejection. She doesn't want to hurt her friend any more than she already has. And she doesn't want to get involved when that's not what the friend wants. And Anthe over here basically says that part of Juri's feelings are what she's hiding. Which, pot calling the kettle black. She says it's one part of her true feelings. And Utena's like, well, part of her feelings. She's like, that's a weird way to put it. And Anthe says at times people will say things they'd never normally say or do things they'd never normally do. So Anthe says that there are times where people will say and do what they don't normally do. And what is the reasoning behind that she says? As they're on their bed, she's like, well, do you do that too? This part pissed me off so much because Utena's like, well, do you do things that you normally wouldn't do and say things you normally wouldn't say? And Anthe's like, well, the truth is, and we, the audience, are like, Anthe's been doing that since day one. But Anthe can't tell her that. I'm like, I have a feeling when it comes out what the deal with Anthe is, whether she's been a ghost this whole time, whether she's the power of Dios personified, whatever the reveal is going to be, it is going to crush me. And I'm not ready for that, show. I don't want you to crush me. Why you be doing that? And she says the two words I hate the most in this show, never mind. So we go back to the dorms, similar to Wakaba. Says, I'm not in, please leave a message. She's like, you there, aren't you? I was like, this suddenly became baby reindeer. At least hear me out. So, okay. So Shiori's trying to call Ruka and leaving all these voicemails, which, in hindsight, is foreshadowing to him not being there. Because with Ruka, I'm going to put over here like symbolic things with Ruka. With Ruka, the phone and the idea of the voicemail. We saw the idea of the phone conversations and the voicemail with Mikage, revealing that Mikage was a ghost and was never there to begin with. So the moment she keeps calling Ruka and keeps leaving him voicemails, that should have been a sign to us, the audience, to connect that, oh, just like Mikage, he's not really there. He's already gone. And the fact that the damn sex car has the voicemails installed in them should, as them stored, should be a sign too that he was a ghost this entire time. What's also interesting is I'm like, I know that the car supposedly, we'll put the car up here. The car transports people. The car transports people to the end of the world. Could we also say the end of the world is literally death? I know I compared it to adulthood. But could it also be connected to death itself? Is the car basically like a little ferry across the river Styx that you're basically traveling across the river of death in Hades. They're all in hell. All of the people are in hell right now. Otari Academy is just literally hell. You're perpetually stuck in high school forever. It's a living hell. Forever and ever. But yeah, I felt like now in hindsight, looking at Ruka traveling in the car, it feels like he's traveling through the river Styx in the back seat with Toga and Akio in front, right? And so Akio says, your deeds couldn't match your words. So his deeds or actions did not match your words. I'm like, does Akio know? Does Akio know that Ruka is a ghost? Does Akio know that all this is going down? What, or no, Akio does know. Akio is the mastermind of this all. Does Toga know? One thing that's interesting is that the whole Mikage arc happened while Toga was not present. Toga was not there for the Black Rose Duelist arc. So whether or not Toga was privy to the knowledge that Mikage was a ghost is completely irrelevant. We don't know about that. We can't know about that. But with this arc, it made me wonder, does Toga know that Ruka is dead and he's just a ghost here? Does Toga believe that Ruka is one of his classmates and that he's alive and Akio's the only one that knows? We don't know. And that's like why Toga is such a mystery in this. Toga is always sitting in the front seat, except with Saionji. But that's its own little thing. But he's always in the front seat with Akio, like he wants to be at the right-hand side of hell, at the right-hand side of Hades, playing along, having a stake in the control of the whole situation, when we know that's not really the case. And Ruka says, quite right, my actions didn't match my words, but I was expecting it. And Toga's like, what? So Ruka, did Ruka figure out the game? Did Ruka figure out the game and that's why he had to go? So, because Akio this whole time is just, I don't know if it's just the animation, but he has no smile. He's very void of expression. So did Ruka figure out, because it seems like Ruka figured out the whole thing. And maybe because he figured out the whole thing, he was like, well, it's now or never. Before I wisp away Casper the Friendly Ghost style, I need to go try and win back Juri. I need to try win Juri over before my soul evaporates completely. So I figured out what the deal is. I figured out. He's like, Utena is a dangerous opponent. My skills are no match for hers. And I feel like by no skills, he's not talking about swordsmanship because he's a better swordsman than her. He's talking about the fact that she's so in love purely with Anthe, and Anthe's love matches hers. It is he's no match because he doesn't have that same kind of love that she does. I have a reason to win this no matter what. And the reason is to get Juri to like him. He's like, is that it? And I love the smile. Like, Ruka's smile has been so sinister, but now in this episode, that smile takes on a whole other feeling and it's so melancholy. Like, because Toga says, is that another scheme that you're dreaming up? And he just smiles. Ruka's smile is so much like Mikage's. It's that smile of, the only thing is, Ruka is opposite of Mikage in that Mikage had no clue he was a ghost until the very, very end when he evaporated. And Ruka, I feel, knows he's a ghost. He knows he's on borrowed time. He knows he doesn't have long. And so he's just trying to, like, to his advantage, use whatever time he's been granted to do this for him. Right? And that's his scheme. And he's like, I know this scheme is futile, but I'm going to do it anyway, because what else? He's like, there are no miracles. That's what she always says. So again, the idea, if you believe in miracles, they will know your true feelings, but there are no miracles. Meaning that they will not know your true feelings. He wants to prove that wrong. He wants to get his true feelings out there for Juri to see if she will respond to them. Right? Oh, this episode's so good. The more I think about this episode, the more I like it. It was tense in the moment for a lot of reasons, but now in hindsight, this may be one of my favorite episodes. I love this so much. So Juri did go. Juri did go see Shiori. Notice whenever he says there are no miracles, her back is turned to the camera, meaning, does she really think that? No, she's just saying that. Again, your actions don't match your words. Haha! So yeah, so Juri goes to see Shiori. And Shiori's like, oh, it's you. Did you come to laugh at me? The thing that sucks about all of this is that Shiori does not realize how kind Juri is. Do I think that Shiori thinks that Juri likes her? I think so. I think that she thinks that Juri likes her. She doesn't want, I think we got that impression from the Black Rose arc, but Shiori does not want to admit that Juri is correct, because that would be like a whole world shifting dynamic. So instead, Shiori kind of deflects, because she is, like Ruka says, she's selfish and a brat. And she instead of just having a conversation with Juri and opening up to her and revealing what she feels, instead of doing that, she chooses to repress, and she projects her insecurities onto Juri, and just basically she's like, and again, I feel like the fact that the door is open, but there's a lock and chain preventing Juri from coming in is so symbolic, because it's literally Shiori opening the door, but she doesn't want to come out of the closet. She doesn't want to come out. She's just opening it up and saying, yeah, I'm in here, but I don't want to come out. It's literally what it's representing. And she's like, did you come to laugh at me? And there's kind of this implication where she's like, did you come to laugh at me? Or you must be really happy. And then Juri's like, well, I'd never. And she's like, more and more you disgust me. Did you expect me to come crying to you for help? Well, too bad. I'm not going to do what you want. Juri's like, I'm not going to, or Shiori says, I'm not going to rely on you and admit you were right. Shiori has all these insecurities, which understandable. And she doesn't want to admit that Juri was correct about her and that she does like Juri. She doesn't want to admit that. And so it's literally the representation of the open door saying, yeah, I'm in here. Yep, you're right. I'm not going to admit it. Don't, are you happy now that you're going to get what you want? And like, how does that make me feel? So all of Shiori's emotions are understandable. And I think Juri gets that. It's just heartbreaking for Juri, because she does get it. And she's like, I just want her to be happy. And Juri's like, if her being in the closet and not admitting her sexuality and repressing those emotions makes her feel better and get through the day, fine. Then let her do it. Then let her be that way. Let her be in denial if it makes her feel better. And that's the sacrifice that Juri wants to make. Meanwhile, she's sitting there watching Ruka battle there, and then he slowly looks over and then confronts her at the room with the 3 windows and the 3 chairs. And he's like, are you serious? And so what's interesting is Ruka went through this situation of Juri, because the whole thing was, at first Juri said to stay away from Shiori. And so Ruka was like, oh, you like Shiori? Well, I'll get Shiori to like me. And then what will happen is you won't like Shiori anymore, because you'll realize it's futile. And then I can dump Shiori and make a move on you, and maybe that'll work. And obviously it won't. But at first he's like, well, but you told me to stay away from her. Like, I was just, you told me to stay away from her and keep my hands off of her. And he's like, now you want me to take her back? And Juri's like, well, if it'll make her happy. And that's the last thing Ruka wants to hear, because Ruka wanted to psychologically break Juri down to where she would get over Shiori, and then he could make his move. And that's not what happened. And that's not what Ruka wanted. And he's like, oh, well, and it's like, oh, okay. So that's where we're going with this. He's like, well, she'll like, if it'll make her happy. And then you can see him with the rose duelist ring. And he's just kind of like, this is not what I thought was going to happen. This is not what I imagined. The fact that Juri is putting someone else above herself, which is quite the opposite of anybody that's ever been part of the Black Rose duelists, and is quite the opposite of what Ruka wanted, because the end of the world and Akio seemed to prey upon people's they seem to prey upon people's darkness and their toxic traits, and Juri's not showing that. And he's like, well, this is not what I wanted. And he just looks, I can picture Juri. Ruka looks so grumbly. He's such an unfriendly ghost. He literally, with the blue hair and the stripe, I've been trying to figure out what he reminds me of. He reminds me of the grumpy, gloomy Care Bear, like with the rain cloud. That's what Ruka is. And he's like, that's not what I wanted. I didn't want you to sacrifice for her. And he's like, well, I can't do that. He's like, I don't want to do that. And she's like, well, Ruka. And he's like, I appreciate your friendship with her, but she's spoiled, pushy, and self-centered. That part there, I was like, oh yeah, Ruka likes her. Because Ruka, he's sitting there being like, Shiori, he's like, she's not worthy of Juri. At that moment, I was like, Ruka believes that Shiori is not worthy of Juri, and he's sitting there going, it should have been me. That's literally what he's doing. He's like, why do you like her? She's not good enough for you. Why are you wanting to be with her? And I was like, oh no. And Juri's response, where she gets kind of mad, he's like, not to mention a liar. Who'd want a girl like that? At that point, when he's like, who'd want a girl like that? And Juri's like, well, I do. So don't insult me for my taste. Yeah, literally. That is exactly what's happening in this scene. And she's like, well, who do you think you are? And he's like, well, you don't control me. I'm a ghost, mother trucker. And she's like, what gives you the right to hurt her? And he's like, you don't need to know. Again, she says, well, what gives you the right to hurt Shiori? And he's like, well, you don't even know. And it's like, he doesn't want to admit that he likes Juri because he knows how futile that is. It's him and Juri are going through the same boat. The only problem is that Juri has Shiori in her mind, and Shiori does like Juri back. She just doesn't want to admit it. And Ruka has Juri in his mind, but Juri doesn't love him back. And it's like, it's driving him crazy. She says, God, what a cruel bastard you've become. And what about you? Presuming to order others around. And when he looks back at her and she like fights him, oh, I got a little bit worried because he's like, how about this instead? And when he pushes her up against the wall and says, I was thinking that I would go out with you now. And she's like, well, who would want an asshole like you? And the way his eyes move in that moment, she's like, who would want an asshole like you? And he kind of like flinches. Like you can tell that hurt him. That he was like, oh, he doesn't want to be called an asshole by her. He's like, because you love your fencing club's captain, don't you? And she's like, get real. You've insulted me enough. And he tries to assault her. He tries to sexually assault her in that moment. Like he's going to force himself on her and make her realize that she liked him. And at first, she kind of pauses for a moment and doesn't struggle with him as much. But then she ends up biting him. She ends up biting him and pushes him away and bites his lip and draws blood. And at first he's like, oh, well, and I don't blame her because I'm like, dude, get off. Like, that's not cool. And that seems, the moment though that he slowly turns towards her and smiles, I was like, hi, Mikage 2.0. But he reveals that he grabbed her locket. And at that point she's like, well, when did you do that? And he was going to step on it. And just him slowly looking down on there, you can tell that he doesn't want to smash the locket. Like Ruka's playing the villain, but he's playing the villain. He's trying to be Toga, but he's not as villainous as he lets on. Because he goes, if he were villainous like Akio and Toga, he'd have smashed the locket. He'd have smashed it if that were him. But he didn't. Because he knew what that would do to Juri. He knew that would crush her. We'll go back to the duel at the end of this, but he knew that would crush her and just completely break her heart. And even though he hates the idea that she likes Shiori, he loves her enough that he doesn't want to do that. So he doesn't break the locket. And I feel like at that moment, when she goes to grab the locket and smacks him and saves the locket for herself, and he looks down at her and sees just how much she loves Shiori. Like she's so desperate to keep that love alive. He's like, well, shit, she's not gonna love me. And he's like, am I gonna really make her hate me and curse me because I'm not willing to admit that she doesn't have feelings for me? So he says that he's gonna change his mind and that he'll go ask her back out again. Yep. And he's like, you hate me more than you can stand, don't you? And he starts to walk away. So, before we get to the challenge you to a duel part, basically Ruka is in this situation where Ruka hates Shiori because Shiori does not confess to Juri. He hates Shiori because he knows that Shiori likes Juri. And he's like, you like her. Why won't you confess to her? Like, why wouldn't you? She's worth it. Why are you being such a brat? Like, Ruka hates it. And then Juri does not want to push Shiori because she doesn't want to open up that can of worms and then have it come out that Shiori do something that she'll regret and that Juri will regret. But she wants to make sure that Shiori is happy. And Ruka realizes that Ruka loves Juri enough that he kind of does what Juri does to Shiori. He doesn't want to hurt Juri. So he's like, fine. It's like he does the sacrifice now. He's like, fine. You want me to date her to make her happy? I don't want to make you unhappy. Fine, I'll date her. Go. It's just like this big triangle circle thing. And then when he says, you probably hate me so much, Juri doesn't hate Ruka. They're friends, they're childhood friends. She doesn't hate him, but she doesn't like him that way either. And so finally she tries to compromise and humble him, being like, look, I'll challenge you to a duel. You know what? I'll challenge you to a duel. And if I lose, I'll do whatever you want. And if I win, you and Shiori. And he's like, no, I get it. And then we see her duel him and it does not work out. She ends up losing to him. And she ends up losing to him because we cut straight to her talking about them when they first, learned to fence for each other. I love that we had the sunset and them fighting. And then after the intermission, we cut to her crouching on the ground, which physically shows that she lost. This show's genius. Absolutely genius. Now, the interesting thing is, he doesn't make her go out with him. Instead, they challenge Utena to the duel, but he doesn't make her go out with him. His request, she's like, I'll do whatever you want. And his request isn't fine, date me, even though because he knows what that will do. Instead, he takes her to the end of the world. It's almost like Ruka gives Juri a choice. It's almost like in this final act, Juri's given the choice when she gets in the car of what is she going to do with Akio's trip to the end of the world. Right? We'll see. We'll talk about that when we get to it. But yeah, so then we cut back to Juri losing. She's like, the moment you joined the fencing club, your distinction was clear. Even covered in dirt, your brilliance still shone through. Your potential was far beyond mine. Again, sign number 27, that Ruka was a ghost, saying your potential is far beyond mine. Talking about Juri being the fencing captain because he's a ghost and his potential is cut short because of his death. And she's like, you're exaggerating. He's like, oh, is that so? He says, there's someone I want you to meet. And then she's like, and honestly, I don't want people to get in this damn sex car because once they get in the sex car, it's always I'm like, the last thing I wanted in this episode was for Juri to hook up and fall in love with Ruka. Cause I was like, no show. She's she is our canonical lesbian. Don't make the patriarchy take her over. No. Luckily that doesn't happen in this episode. And I was really happy for the episode not doing that. But Ruka says, can you hear it? And he says, he's like, there, can you hear it? He says, if your soul has not truly given up, then you can hear the sound. Again, that whole thing of if your soul hasn't truly given up, another sign that he's a ghost. This is his soul's last run to try to retain itself. That races about the end of the world. And of course she's like, what the fudge? And she's like, what's that sound? So again, she too is a ghost that hasn't given up probably. And he's like, say your line, please, Toga. Hello, Toga, say your line, please. Which again, makes me wonder Toga's role in all of this. We're just at this haunted academy at this point. And then Toga's like, join us. Again, also referring to the fact that this is a time loop. Things are happening over and over again in a cycle. Follow us to the world you desire. I love that he just stands there in front of the chair posing and Ruka's like, yep, this seems on point. And Juri's like, what the fudge? Also noting that Toga never goes with them on the trips. He's just the messenger that opens up the door and they go through. And so then he tells Juri to get in. You said you'd do whatever I asked. Is Toga the car itself? Is he the spirit of the car? We don't know. We don't know. There's so much that's left unsaid. Okay, one thing is interesting about this, and the one thing that I think is completely relevant is the fact that in the last episode, Ruka was in the backseat with Shiori, and it was very sexual. She was making out with him. They were having sex. It was a thing. That is not the case at all in this episode, and I'm so happy. For the first time, well, I guess Kozu is in the front seat too, but I feel like if they're in the front seat, if they're in different seats, there is a separate. Oh, okay. Here's the thing. In the car so far, as we've done this, we've had Kozu in the front seat, and in the back seat, we've had Mickey. Those two are not having sex. They're not sexually attracted. They are brother and sister. But in the back seat beside, and then when we did the vision, Mickey was in the front seat alongside Anthe. You can make with that what he will. I don't think it's sexual, but you can make that what it will. Whatever. But so we had that. Then we had in a different episode, you had Ruka and Shiori together in the back seat, and they were having sex, and that was a thing, right? Then also in the seat, who else have we had so far? We've had Kozu and them. What was episode 26? We've had 27 was Nanami episode, 28 was that. Episode 25 was the first one of this. I can't believe we only had 4 episodes. But in that one, guess who was in the back seat together? Oh, Saionji and Toga. Saionji and Toga. Uh-huh. Sure. Sure they weren't doing anything in the car. Sure they weren't. I bet not. And now here, you have, in this episode, you have Ruka in the front seat and Juri in the back seat. Which, that separation to me and them not having sex. Also, Ruka has his back facing her the entire time. Like, he does not want to face his true feelings with her. In this moment, he could have been, if he wanted, here's the thing. Ruka, at the end of the day, to me, this scene proved to me that he wasn't a villain completely. Because if he was villainous like Toga and Akio, he would have been in the backseat with her, trying to put the moves on her. But he genuinely loves Juri enough that despite his moment of relapse earlier when he was trying to like force himself on her, he doesn't do that here. And that made me respect his character a lot more. I also like that Juri is not convinced by the sex car. She is not affected whatsoever. Again, because she's a lesbian. She's not affected at all. And she says, "Why are you taking me?" And Ruka plays the voicemails of Shiori saying over and over again, like a time loop, that she only likes Ruka. And Juri is like, "Cool, you've come to torture me. Awesome. Sweet. Great. And she's like, "Do you really enjoy hurting her as much as you seem to?" Like, Juri's not fazed by any of this. I respect this queen. And he doesn't answer. He doesn't answer. Because he's like, it's not that she's like, "Do you really enjoy hurting her?" And the answer is no. He doesn't. He was desperately clinging to try to get Juri to like him. So, he says, "If we could perfect your latent abilities, no one could beat you." He's like, "If you would love me, then no one could beat you." He's like, "I bring out those abilities in you." So he tries to kind of like move the conversation to be like, "Well, you know, you're at your best when you're inspired by me. So if you help me, doesn't that make sense, Juri, that we inspire each other and motivate each other?" He's like, "If you and I join forces, we could defeat Utena and gain the power of miracles." He adds the phrase, "gain the power of miracles," for a couple reasons. One, because otherwise, why would Juri fight Utena? Juri has had no motivation to fight Utena except when it comes to Shiori. That's her only motivation. She would not fight Utena because of Ruka. She fought Utena in the past because of Shiori. But she would not fight Utena because of Ruka. So Ruka says that if we defeat Utena, we gain the power of miracles, which is what you want to get Shiori, right? But his ulterior motive is that if he gains the power of miracles, he gets Juri. So it's kind of like a 2-for-1. He's like, you know, we could just get 2 birds with 1 stone. That won't work out logistically. But in my mind, he's like, if I get the power of miracles, I can get you, Juri. And I'm going to convince you by saying, if you get the power of miracles, you can get Shiori. Only one of these things can be true, but That's when Shiori says, is that why you've been after Shiori and me like this? And he says, for miracles to occur, you need a sacrifice. And she's like, well, you're a coward. You want this miracle power that badly. And he's like, well, you're the one that yearns for miracles. And she's like, Shiori isn't a tool for you. Both of these two individuals want a miracle. The problem is that only one of them can have the miracle because the miracles are in contradiction of each other, right? Juri can't have Shiori and Ruka can't have Juri. You can't have both of those things working unless you are all down for a threesome in a polyamorous relationship, which could solve all of these problems, but the show doesn't seem invested in that concept. So the show is invested in a two-person dynamic, sadly enough. We could solve a lot of problems if threesomes were okay. If people are fine with polyamorous relationships, we could solve a lot of damn problems in this world. Love triangles be damned. So, yeah. So basically, they both go back and forth about who's doing this for who. And then he says, believe in miracles and they will know your true feelings. Weren't those your words? And what's interesting is those words seem to have inspired him, right? They seem to have inspired him and he's kept them in his heart. And she's like, well, and then she can't respond to that because those are her words. I love the silence. And she says, you seem to be misunderstanding something. I don't need my feelings to be known. She's like, I don't need miracles because I don't need my feelings to be known out there for Shiori. She says, even if I gained the power of miracles, all I desire is to release her from you. So she's like, at the end of the day, if she doesn't return my love, that's fine. But all I want is for you to stop hurting her because I love her and you hurting her is the worst thing in the world. And at that point, mission, wish granted, Ruka ends up leaving. She's like, that's all. I won't let you keep doing this. And so at that point she says, for that, I'll go along with you. She's like, fine. You know what? I'll get this power of miracles. And getting the power of miracles, I'll make you leave. And that's why I think Juri was not persuaded by the sex car. This was just a ride for Ruka's sake. But and I think Ruka knew that going in, but he wanted to confirm it felt like he was wanting to confirm Juri's ultimate desires, because in the car, it seems like people reveal stuff about themselves. So he's like, I want to see what Juri really feels. And Ruka finds out that she really does she loves Shiori enough that she'll go along with Ruka's plans, if not just to keep him away from her. Good for Juri. Juri is like one of my favorites. I freaking love her. And Ruka, that's not what he wanted to hear. He didn't, he's just like, okay. And then he finally lifts his head back, like he's just soaking in the wind. Like, this is going to be my last hurrah before I evaporate. And him being like, it's decided then. What a melancholy car ride. Like, he finally knows she's going to help me, but it's for all the wrong reasons. And then Akio's like, oh, by the way, I'm still here. I'll reveal the end of the world to you now. So you can go up here and do this too. But it's not what the other car rides have been. Anyway, it's very melancholy. Anyway, then Utena's like, really? Really, we've got a duel too? Are you serious? So we didn't get the Shadow Girls in that moment. We didn't get the Shadow Girls. Instead, we just got Shiori sitting by where the Shadow Girls normally are. And that's pretty much it. And then we go up here to do the duel. I'm going to go through the lyrics, but I wanted to see a few of these things first. One thing that I was really happy about is that what we see is coming out as the duelist is Juri with the rose on. I was really happy with this for a number of reasons. One, I was happy about this because Juri is the duelist, not Ruka again. I was also happy about this because Ruka comes out on the side of the bride and Juri comes out as the duelist. Would have liked Ruka in a dress, but I'm also very, very satisfied that Juri was not in a dress because that's not her style. That's not her character. Good for the show. But yeah, she comes out with the rose and Ruka pulls the sword from her. It doesn't hurt her when he pulls the sword from her, but it's mainly the sword is powered by her love of someone that's not Ruka. So there's such a melancholy layer to it. But damn, the animation in this episode. Can we talk about the animation in this episode? Where she goes over to Ruka. And when she puts her hand on him, she just says, do it. Like, there's no passion. There's no love between them. It's just, I'm doing this for someone else that's not you. Man, the way, the animation, though, of him pulling the sword from her, it's almost, there's a reverence to it almost, where he doesn't grope her in any way. He has his hand above her, and he has his hand almost on her cheek, as if to like, I love the animation, the way that the shadows are. God, it's beautiful. I love it so much. I feel for Ruka. I feel for him because he's frowning there knowing that this is their last chance and knowing that she's not doing this for him. She's doing it for someone else. That's so freaking sad, right? Meanwhile, Utena and Anthe are fighting for each other, supposedly. So we have the duel, and then we go back to Shiori throughout the duel. It was so hard to focus with both the lyrics and this. We go back to her losing the duel to Ruka on the bridge. We go back to her losing the duel to him. And he says, hidden feelings, huh? And then I love this moment here where he pushes her aside. And as she looks back at him, he says, how painful they must be. At that point, I'm like, yeah, hidden feelings, how painful they must be. Ruka has all these hidden feelings towards her. Now, what's interesting is his hair is different there. So I'm like, is this him from the past before he died? And as she goes back up, or maybe it's them from now. I guess it's them from now, too, when they fought on there. I like that the focus is more on the duel between her and him, because the duel between her and Utena is not what's relevant here. And again, Shiori could have gotten the rose from Utena at any given time, right? She could have. She could have. She could have gotten that rose there, but she pauses and hesitates. She could have gone down. And Ruka's like, don't hesitate, Shiori. But she does, right? And they keep on fighting each other. And a part of me, there's a number of reasons why this could be. I mean, Utena's struggling really a lot with the sword, and Anthe's just watching, and Ruka's just watching to see what ends up happening. And we see Shiori in the chair by herself, like as the two of them fight each other. And she's caught in the center of it. And he's like, Shiori, she's a fool. Like, Shiori's a fool. She doesn't deserve you. She doesn't realize that you get miracles only by standing on the sacrifices of others. He basically is like, she doesn't realize what she's doing, that she's hurting you, and that she only got this miracle of being with me by throwing you to the curb. And he's like, isn't that awful? Doesn't that make you mad? He's like, yet miracles only come to people like her. That's the thing, too, is that Ruka's like, you and I both have a true love. We both have a true love. He's like, I love you, Shiori, and you like her, and she's the one that gets the miracle because she was willing to stamp on someone, and we weren't that cruel. And I was like, oh my God. Ah! Insane. Insane. Don't you find that unfair, Shiori? And what's interesting about this is that you could kind of argue that Utena's not like Shiori. I'm not saying that. But the fact that Utena gets to have these miracles when she, and maybe Ruka was talking about Utena. Maybe he was saying Utena's the fool too, because Utena gets all of these miracles handed to her and she doesn't even realize it. And those miracles that Utena are getting are on the backs of everyone else. So Utena gets to win and gets to be special, kind of like what Wakaba was arguing. But in her being special, she tramps on all the dreams of all the other duelists. And yeah. And then the great thing is, in this moment, as Utena comes down with the power of the prince in her, she goes to strike Shiori. Ruka calls out her name, and Shiori lifts her head up. So in that moment, it's almost like a couple things happen all at once. Ruka's basically shouting out his love for Shiori. Shiori is maybe realizing that Ruka loved Shiori and not her, and also that she likes Shiori in that moment too. And Ruka doesn't want this to be over in that moment. But what Utena ends up striking is the locket. She ends up breaking the locket in that moment instead of the rose. Oof. And then Utena falls down. Now, Juri could have gotten back and fought Utena and knocked the rose off. She could have. She could have done that. The locket breaks into 1,000 pieces. We don't see the photo, but I think that's just an animation thing. And then she goes over there and stumbles. I was not expecting this at all. And it's basically like, because of Ruka making her duel, she ended up having the locket destroyed. Which is so sad. That's the last thing that Juri wanted. Juri's like heart and soul, her love for Shiori, all of it was destroyed in that moment. Because she had agreed to duel. And we see her by the flower. And like her curls kind of fall out in that moment a little bit. And she takes the rose off herself. And drops it. Oh. And Utena's like, but why did you do that? Why did you not keep dueling me? And I feel like in that moment, there's so many ways you can interpret this. It's like, did Juri take the rose off because she was like, what was the point? Does Juri in that moment, because it was the locket, this representation of attachment? Was the locket the representation of attachment? And now that it's gone, she's like, why keep it up? Was she like, is she thinking that like in that moment when the locket's destroyed, was that showing Juri that she keeps this harbored unrequited crush, but she's not doing anything about it? And did she realize that her fighting Utena, who legit has a relationship with Anthe, and it could lead to something, is she like, am I willing to step on and sacrifice them for myself when I'm not even brave enough to admit that I like her in front of her? If I'm not willing to make those steps and those sacrifices to reveal my feelings, is it right for me to even trounce on Utena and Anthe? Is that even correct? Which is kind of a double-edged sword, because she's like, if she realizes that and is like, I'm not going to fight a girl that has this relationship with Anthe when I can't even come out and have this relationship with Shiori and admit it. But in doing so, that means that she's accepting that she'll never be with Shiori. And God, the rose being plucked and getting rained on. And I love the cars when they did the windshield wiper. Yep. And then I loved also the rain droplets falling on the lens. Like we're seeing it from Juri's perspective. And yeah, it only rains inside the sphere of the arena. Of course it does. And Utena's like, did I do something bad? Utena's like, should I have lost? What was going on? And Anthe's like, Anthe's face is literally like, welp, here's what we're doing. And then, God, Ruka coming up to her. And he's like, it'll be all right, Juri. Oh. He doesn't say sorry. He just thinks, and I'm sure my dog saw something. He's like, it'll be all right, Juri. It almost feels like in that moment, it almost feels like he's trying to comfort her, knowing that he's about to go away. Of course, the windshield wipers. And yeah, him standing with her amidst these cars that look like they're in a damn graveyard. And then looking up at the rain. So then we're back to the 3 chairs and Juri's sitting there in them. And she turns around and says, it'll be all right, huh? Oh, she kind of slow turned like a ghost in that moment too. And just looking at the 2 chairs being like, will it be all right? So then we have the 3 windows and they say Juri's the captain again. And yeah, Tsuchiya hasn't been coming to school lately. And then Nanami's like, oh, but he just recovered too, didn't he? And Mickey's like, well, he'll be sorry if he gets expelled for poor attendance. I'm like, oh, getting expelled, huh? Yeah, Nanami, sure. And then Mickey ignores, like, everybody's forgetting about it. Like, Nanami, girl. Everybody's forgetting about it, saying, oh, that girl got hurt. But jury's in charge, so there's nothing to worry about. And they're like, call Ms. Shinozaki, get an ambulance. So then, of course, there's 3 beds. There are 3 beds. 3 beds in the hospital. Oh, my God. Does that mean 3 beds, like Mikage's died, Ruka's died, and now we have this girl in the hospital in the 3rd bed? Also, there's like a big hanging like plant or cranes or something in a fruit basket on the table, and she's got flowers. Like, she's like, oh, sorry, we have regionals coming up soon too. I'm like, oh, like, is this a sports anime? Uh-huh. She's like, don't worry, just concentrating on healing your leg. She's like, oh, I'm sorry to cause you all this trouble, especially now. And then Jury leaves. And then the big reveal that we have the 2 nurse orderlies that are the shadow girls come through. And they're like, hey, did you hear? That patient died yesterday. Oh, yeah, that poor guy, and he was really cute, too. Meaning Ruka. They're like, and the hospital kept saying how much he wanted to fence again. Didn't they? Yeah, and apparently he apparently knew how sick he was, but he still insisted on leaving the hospital to go back to school for a day, right? Uh-huh. There must have been a girl in the fencing club that he loved, right? And that reminds me, he used to say something a lot. He wanted to give the power of miracles to the one that he loved. Son of a bitch. He wanted to give her the power of miracles so that she could be happy. And it didn't work out in the end. Did she cause that power? He wanted to free her from something. Free her? What does that mean? Who knows? And then there's just 2 chairs. Side by side. And it's Juri and Shiori left. So Ruka's whole deal was that he wanted to free her. He wanted to free her from the pain of being in love with Shiori. Did he end up doing that? With the locket being gone? With the locket being gone and him telling her it's going to be all right? Was he able to free her from that pain? Now that she seems like she can move forward? Is that the case? And the thing about it is, we see her walking back to the school through the trees, and they're like, are you well? And it seems like Juri's talking about Ruka. The next time we meet, there's something I want to ask you. Ooh, well, the next time they meet is when she dies. So, but she's going to be like, did you do this all for me? And then we see Shiori coming out from behind the tree and running towards her. What did you hope to gain by pursuing the power of miracles? And we see Shiori following behind Juri. Like, there's a possibility they could have a relationship moving forward now. Which is ironic because it's the moment that Juri kind of let go of that crush, and that's when it's able to start for real. What did Ruka hope to gain by pursuing the power of miracles? And by pursuing the power of miracles, it was to free his love from suffering. Which, could we say that's what everybody's doing? To free from suffering by pursuing the power of miracles? Utena pursuing the power of miracles is to help Anthe. Saionji pursuing the power of miracles is to help himself, in a sense. Mickey pursuing the power of miracles is to help his sister and himself get back to a nostalgia. Juri pursuing the power of miracles is to free the one she loves from suffering as well. I mean, what did you hope to help by getting it? He wanted to help you. And maybe himself. Oh my God. And he's like, I pray that those feelings reach her. Oh my God. What an episode. So I want to go to talk about the song lyrics, okay? And I know I've talked like almost an hour and 15 minutes already, but we need to talk about the song lyrics. So I found a site that has 2 different versions of the lyrics translated. The song itself is called I Am All the Mysteries in Creation. Of course it is. Sure. There are 2 translations. One is from Central Park Media in the DVD release of 2003, and one is from Nozomi from the DVD release in 2011. So we're just going to look through here, see if there's any discrepancies. They look like little tiny areas. There are also other translations by other people, but I'm going to go with the 2 official DVD release translations and go from there. So it says an ode to the face, an ode to the head or neck, an ode to the hair, an ode to the nails, an ode to the chest, an ode to both hands, an ode to the feet, both feet or legs, and an ode to the body. So it's basically like this is an ode to ourselves, right? In other words, a crest. Their names are crests, the heraldry of the human body. Yes. So the form I see in the mirror, both subtle and complex, a well-known design. White spots on black cloth, courtly etiquette. Black spots on white cloth in the form of a shield, an ever-opposing pattern. People clad in unintelligible symbols. The art of history of the Baroque. If it's not Baroque, don't fix it. But yes, the Baroque is a period of time specific. Salamanders, dragons and porcupines, the Eucharist, a sacrament. Well, that's talking about holy objects, sacrifice. We got some Christian symbology, you know, with crosses and crucifixes, faith and virtue, the sealed away miracle of the rose. So the Rose Bride, so basically the Rose Bride is the one who can grant miracles. We've known that from the start with Anthe, whether she likes it or not. But basically it's talking about how humans are complex and as well as subtle. And basically the idea of, I mean, dragons and salamanders, what I like about it is salamanders are tied in reality. Dragons are more fantastical. So fantasy versus reality. Porcupines, I think of Neon Genesis, you know, the hedgehog's dilemma, putting up like a spiny surface to bury what's deep within. Then it says the sealed away miracle of the rose, the bloom of man and beast, pearls and gems, people and age, a cross or crucifix of diamond flowers or of flowers. So, I mean, the idea of the rose being a cross, sacrifice, all that, we've talked about that symbolism, people and aging, ghosts, pearls and gems, like the bloom of man and beast, like, I mean, sex, reproduction, all that. Then it says gold, silver, purple, green, red, black, blue. Gold and silver, purple and green are secondary colors, red and blue, and then black. Black is kind of an interesting color there, but I mean, gold, silver, purple. I don't know if these are connected to colors that we've seen in the series. Like we've had Mickey with blue, red with Toga, gold, I guess you could tie with Shiori, silver, and then purple. I mean, purple's with Anthe, black's with Utena. I don't think silver would go with Nanami, but anyway. Then we have these names. Alhambra, Isfahan, Caserta, Linderhof, Chevelle. I want to look some of these up because these names, I'm like, what do they mean? What's the point of these? So I want to look up some of these alongside it and see what we get. So Alhambra is a palace located in Spain. And then Isfahan is a city as well. Okay. And then Caserta, are these all cities? They are cities. They're in Italy. Why are we doing random European cities? Linderhof is a city is a castle in Germany. Are they all castles? Barmarzo is a town in Italy. Why are we just doing these random Italian towns? Flora is, okay, a city as well. Matthias is, what does Matthias mean? Oh, so we had a bunch of cities. Matthias is a variant of Matthew. All right. Versailles is a city as well in France. And then Obelisk is a tall four-sided monument with a pyramid top that tapers as it rises. Well, we got the pyramid, so we got that. Zemek is a city as well. Lots of cities. Imperial palaces, which is Solabella is an island, so being isolated. Anfiteritro, what is that? An amphitheater. So stages, castles, palaces, islands, you know, Orpheus Grotto is the Orpheus Grotto is a small artificial cave building in the Baroque garden of Hellbrunn Palace in Salzburg, Austria. Well, there's our connection to Baroque and the idea of the cave, allegory of the cave, who knows? And then Neuschwanstein is also a castle or grotto, tying to the prince maybe, to the castle with the prince perhaps. Santa Maria della, and those Consulzione are also a city as well. Okay, cool. Caves, sculptures, fountains, palaces, peaks, bronzework, frescoes, domes, castles, villas. I looked up all of those places just for the lyrics to tell me exactly what they were in the next verse. Well, shit. Do my work for me, song. And then says, all around, I alive and living, forms of myself. Near and far, I am all the mysteries. In all creation, I am all the mysteries. In all the world, I am all the mysteries. So yeah, just ourselves, representations of the mysteries of the world, represented in one human body amidst many. Those lyrics are really good. Good for them. Ah! This episode was so good. This episode was so good. I can't believe Ruka's dead. That twist at the ending, y'all. That twist at the ending, I was not ready. I was not ready. Nope. And guess what I'm not going to be ready for? Any of the episodes after this. Because we have 9 episodes left and a movie. Wild. This show is absolutely wild. And I love it. So, yeah. Anyway, what a way to introduce Ruka last week and have me theorizing all over the place for him. And then this episode was like, actually, this is all you need to know. And it's like, you do you, show. You do you. So anyway, I'm really excited to hear your comments down below. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Revolutionary Girl Utena, episode 30, y'all. See you then.